Halloween is a couple of days away, so here are my top 5 nostalgic horror films to watch. So number 5, Blade, directed by Stephen Norrington and starring the amazing Wesley Snipes. Definitely one of my favourites. I don't think there'll ever be like a comic book film that's been realised perfectly, like without any flaws and things. I know there's an upcoming Blade film, but yeah, Wesley Snipes is just the perfect Blade. So the first Blade film, oh man, it was so bloody. Like that first scene where he goes into like this vampire den and like the sprinklers come on and it's just all blood and things. So yeah, I think that was one of the first films where I saw so much blood on screen and things. There's also a character in it and I can't remember what his name is, but I remember like myself and my brothers nicknamed him the Biscuit. Even though, yeah, it doesn't look tasty at all, but there you go. Number 4, Misery, directed by Rob Reiner and starring Kathy Bates and James Caan. Now, this scares me for the fact that it's people and there's no monsters, there's no real like supernatural, paranormal like thing to be scared of, but it's the fact that it's a person. A psychological thriller, really. Yeah, I mean, Kathy Bates, I think she won an Oscar for it. Like, I'll have to double check after I do the video and things. Her performance in that, where she literally goes from this really nice person to like this horrible like psycho, basically. I find that so disturbing. It's based on the Stephen King novel. Yeah, even now, like when I watch it and things, I'm just like, oh. I'd rather be stuck in a room with like a ghoul or like something really like atrocious than Annie Wilkes, you know. There are a couple of moments in that where you're just kind of on the edge of your seat or like scrunching a pillow or something because, God, it's just so tense. So number 3 is The Blair Witch Project, directed by Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick. Yeah, now this was like one of those films I remember watching and I was absolutely disturbed by it. Like really disturbed. So if you don't know of it, it's one of those groundbreaking horror films. You know, it was that film that kind of broke the mold for indie horror, kind of opened the door for indie horror as well on a bigger scale. It's done so well. It is done so it's like that found footage style film where you're following these students that are investigating like this urban myth and then they get lost in the woods. And yeah, I mean, if you haven't seen it, definitely watch it. Definitely one of those like nostalgic ones for Halloween, I think. I mean, the marketing behind it as well was done so well because they didn't really reveal who the actual actors were for a long time. Like people thought, oh my God, these are actually missing kids, you know, that have gone out into the woods to investigate this urban legend. It's not real, it is actually a film. As 90s kids, we were kind of like brought up with horror. Like horror was kind of infused in like the kid shows and things like Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps. Those were really disturbing, and I mean the level of like horror in those I don't think you'd get away with nowadays, especially. I mean, even down to some of the creatures in a lot of these kids films, like The Witches really stands out for me because I mean, that face, and even Legend by Ridley Scott, the creatures and things in that, like, if you showed that to a child of today, like, I'm sure they'd have nightmares and things. And yeah, I mean, wow, what a time we grew up in. So, number 2 on my list is, like, one of my favourite horror films, to be honest. I was contemplating putting this first, but yeah, no, sadly it just falls into second place, and it's Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, starring the amazing Gary Oldman and Winona Ryder. The cast in that is like fantastic. Apart from like Keanu Reeves, I think he was kind of miscast. His performance in that film does get ridiculed, and I'm not surprised. It wasn't a great performance from him, definitely not one of his best. Even Anthony Hopkins is in it as well as Van Helsing. And I love the aesthetic of it, I love the creepiness of it, I love the sound design, I love all of it, to be honest. I think it's just, oh, it's so pleasing to the eye and like just, yeah, amazing. It's an amazing like retelling of Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think it's the only one, to to be honest. I know there's been remakes and inspired films and things from Bram Stoker's Dracula, but for me, yeah, Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula is just top notch. I just love the Count. I love his mannerisms, and I love like Gary Oldman's deliverance in that. Oh, I mean, watch it, and if you haven't watched it, definitely watch it. I mean, it's kind of one of those staple films, I think, for most horror fans. It should be anyway, in my opinion. So I thought I'd kind of plagiarise some of those top 5 film movie videos and do some honourable mentions. Frighteners, directed by Peter Jackson, before Lord of the Rings people. Just loved the kind of quirkiness to that film, but there's such like a dark undertone as well. Another honourable mention is Silver Bullet, directed by Dan Attias. It features Corey Haim, everyone knows from Lost Boys and a lot of like 80s to 90s films. And Silver Bullet, it was one of those films I remember watching, and because it was so disturbing, I think I kind of blocked it from my memory, that I didn't realise it was like an actual film. The last film that did that was Dark Crystal as well. I wasn't sure if it was a film. It was one of those things I questioned whether or not it was like a nightmare or something. Last honourable mention is 30 Days of Night. I mean, yeah, it's another vampire film. I think I do have a bit of a vampire fetish, or at least I did. 30 Days of Night for me really disturbs me, not just for the fact that it's a town that's kind of plunged into 30 days of night. It's a town set in Alaska where they experience a month of night where there's no sunrise. So this town gets invaded by vampires, but these vampires, I mean, I've had nightmares about these vampires because that's how disturbing they are. They're just a complete contrast to Bram Stoker's Dracula, where he's very aristocratic and very charismatic and things like that. These are just ravenous, ferocious creatures. You definitely would not want to meet one of these in a dark alleyway. Number 1 on my nostalgic films to watch for Halloween, The Monster Squad, directed by Fred Decker, and yeah, it is one of my all-time favourite movies. Oh, it's such a time. I mean, like, my favourite movie of all time is like black and white Bette Davis film, but I don't know, there's something about The Monster Squad that really, like, yeah, it gives me that kind of nostalgic vibe. I remember like Saturday mornings and things watching it and like rewinding it and then watching it again because it was just fantastic. It's a group of kids and they their town is kind of invaded by Dracula and the Mummy and Frankenstein and the Wolfman. Those classic monsters, basically. I love the sound design in it as well, like the opening scene where it's like this kind of frantic violin and the transformation of the Wolfman and things. So good. And I mean, it's so cheesy. I mean, there's so many like lines in it that are really like classic cheese, but it adds to the charm of that film, I think. It was a big flop for its time, you know, when it was released and that, but it's through the years that it gained like this cult following. Yeah, I'd still love it. It's one of those easy watching films. Sometimes I just put it in the background and kind of mime the words when they say them. Some of the characters are bogus. So those are my 5 favourite Halloween films. I'm not really a fan of like intense violence. I don't like those kind of horror films at all. The Saw films and other like gore, what are they called? Gore porn films. They're not really my cup of tea at all. Yeah, that's that. If you are a fan of horror, do check out my store, Horrified Store. It's apparel for the horror lovers. Yeah, if you'd like to support me, do. Hopefully there's something that you'll like as well. So it's t-shirts, hoodies, all that good stuff. Stuff that you won't find on the high street, basically. If you enjoyed this video, if you want me to do more film related videos, subscribe, guys, girls, non-binds. Drop a comment with your top 5 horror films to watch for Halloween. I hope you all have a happy, safe Halloween, and that's it. Stay awesome, stay classy, be kind, and bye. got that right, yo. Can't remember the movie. And Blade number 1, it was just for the first COVID brain, man. What the hell? I've got absolute fog in my brain. Thought I'd do some Halloween caricatures. Number 4. That's it.